Now, at this point, we've borrowed $11.5 million over the course of a couple of years. My name is Matt Cox, and I'm a con man. My story starts, when I was a kid. My mom was a strict Catholic. My father was not a strict Catholic. I'm not even sure what his religion was. He never went to church with us. He was an alcoholic. My parents got married. They met. I want to say they met in Jacksonville, Florida. Dated for a few months, 6 months. I think they got married 6 months to less than a year. They've been dating. They got married. My mother couldn't get pregnant. She was, back then they called it being barren, and she couldn't get pregnant. So they adopted 2 girls and a boy through the Catholic Church. That's how adoptions were done back then. Through various organizations, you could adopt a baby. Now, of course, it's done through the state. Pretty sure. So when my mother was 40 years old, she went in for a hysterectomy, and the doctor opened her up and found out that she was pregnant. And I guess 7 or 8 months later, she was 2 or 3 months pregnant, so they obviously didn't do the hysterectomy. 7 or 8 months later, I was born. My father was definitely the dominant individual in our family. He was the alpha dog, and everybody kind of danced around him. But he had a real alcohol problem. However, he was extremely charismatic. He was a great salesperson. He made good money. He made good money, and I think kind of growing up, seeing him make good money, I started feeling like you could behave however you wanted as long as you made good money. And and that seemed to be the case with him. He would sober up for 3 to 6 months, maybe even a year, and then he would end up going on a 2-week drunken binge, and just a tirade, and he was just a complete belligerent asshole as far as a human being is concerned when he was drinking. When he wasn't drinking, he was charming. He could get anybody to like him. So he would go to meetings, for the insurance company he worked for. He worked for State Farm Insurance Company, and he would go to meetings literally drunk, and they would have to ask him to leave. And State Farm, instead of firing him, they would just put him into like an alcohol drug rehab center. And he would go in for 30 days, and he'd come back, and he'd be all better, and he'd be good for a year or so. And then, or maybe he'd be good for 6 months, and he'd fall off the wagon. My mom would clean him up and try and hide the fact that he was drunk or he was drinking, and she'd make excuses. She was definitely an enabler. And, as a result of that, I just really came to the conclusion that you could do anything as long as you made a lot of money. Because I remember one time he wrecked his car. Like, obviously when I grew up it was an upper middle class family. So when I was, 16 years old, I got a new car. And I think a year later I didn't get a new car. I got a used BMW. And a year later I got another used BMW, but it was a very nice BMW. I remember my father was drunk one time and went out and he wrecked his BMW. He then came home, said, "Matthew, give me your keys. I need to use your car." He took my car. He wrecked my car the same day. This is a guy who wrecked 2 BMWs, but he had plenty of money. He paid. He just paid everybody off. And he got both cars fixed, and he paid for the other person's car that he had gotten into the accident with, and everything was fine. I think, and I definitely was not the kid that my father wanted. Like, I certainly never felt that way. I had a learning disability. I had to be placed into private schools. I had to go to schools for kids with learning disabilities. I didn't do well. I had failed. I think I failed the first or second grade. I I ended up going to this one school where essentially it was like they were like babysitters. I mean, basically you did whatever you wanted. You just come here, hang out. We try and teach you some stuff. As long as your parents pay the tuition, you're going to graduate. I ended up graduating high school, goofed off for a year or two, went to college, tried to get a degree in business. That didn't work out. Ended up getting a degree in fine arts. I mean, I did great. Got a degree, straight A's in all my fine arts classes. I think the only C I ever got was in like accounting 2. Everything else was straight A's. Maybe a B every once in a while by mistake. So, but the fine arts degree, got a fine arts degree. My father completely disappointed in the fact that I got a degree in fine arts. I mean, I guess he was okay with the fact that I got a degree, but he was like, it's worthless. I ended up, I worked construction. Actually, first I tried to work for State Farm, and actually failed the aptitude test. So I couldn't get a job working in the same company my father worked at. And I worked construction. Well, I worked as an insurance adjuster for like a year or so. Then I worked in construction, and I was dating this chick that was a stripper. And she had met a guy that owned a subprime company. So she was like, listen, you need to do this. Like, this guy, doesn't seem that hard. He ended up hiring her. While she's working at the subprime company, and yes, so you heard that right. She was a stripper. He met her at the strip club. He then hired her to work at for his lending institution. And they had 40 or 50 locations. Like, this was not a tiny one-man operation. So she says, you've got to come work here. I go to work there, and I was just great at it. Like, my reading and writing skills are horrible. Could barely balance my checkbook, but I was great as a mortgage broker. I think my first month I closed 4 loans. The next month 6. The next month 8. The next month 10. Then they make me a manager. Then that company ended up getting raided, and as a result of it being raided, obviously it was shut down. And I had to go somewhere else, so I went to another mortgage company, worked there for a few months. Then I opened my own mortgage company, and now I'm running my own mortgage company. I didn't even want to be a mortgage broker. But it just, circumstances seemed to almost push me into that situation. So I end up, not that I didn't like it. The very first loan I ever did contained fraud. Like, I had walked into my manager's office, and the loan that I had, the customer had been 30 days late on her rent. As a result of that's a deal killer. Like, you're not getting a loan. You were 30 days late on your rent like 3 months ago. Like, that's not even possible that I'm going to be able to get you a loan. So my manager actually told me to white out the 30-day late, make a copy of the document, put it back in the file, and underwriting would never catch it. And she was right. They never caught it. The loan closed. I made $3,500. Next guy that came in, he had a W-2 that said he made something like, $44,000. But if it made like $51,000 or $49,000, he would have gotten the loan. So I changed a 4 to a 9, put it in the package, slipped right through underwriting. Everything's great. Well, that carried on to my mortgage company, right? So my mortgage company is now committing fraud. I end up hiring a bunch of guys. Like, I started with 3, then it was 6, then it's 9, now it's 12. I got a couple of guys working at their houses. The situation was ideal for fraud. And these were subprime loans. So these are small banks. Not that I think larger banks, to be honest with you, are even easier to get fraud through. But, my brokers would come to me, and they knew what was up. They would say, hey, listen, I got this guy. He made $60,000 last year, but he needs to make $75,000. Like, is there any way we can alter the documents? And I was like, sure, no problem. So I've got a degree in fine arts. I alter the documents. And before long, there's millions and millions of dollars in bad loans going through my mortgage company. We would get caught, and we would get caught every once in a while too. Like we got caught by a company called Pinnacle Bank. Pinnacle Bank, I remember we had done a couple $1 million in mortgages. Like one of my mortgage brokers had done something stupid, and I don't want to bore you or anything, but he'd sent in some canceled checks that appeared to be canceled checks, and they actually weren't canceled checks. They were fake checks. But he'd used the same set of canceled checks on another one of his clients, several other of his borrowers or clients. And so the underwriter recognized the checks. He was like, that's funny because a couple days ago I looked at another one of this guy's loans and they had the same canceled check. Now granted, the name would be different. But still, if the name of the bank is, if it's some bank that's not a regular bank, and canceled checks were rare anyway. So you've got 24 months worth of canceled checks showing that you made your rent payments on time. Let's say your rent payment's $1,100. He has exactly the same checks that say $1,100. They were all made on time, and you gave them the same underwriter, ended up with the same 24 months. Even though the name is different, it's an odd document to get, to prove. Typically, people live at apartment complexes, and the apartment complexes give you a verification of rent. It's just a form. So they don't see a lot of canceled checks, but canceled checks are the best. Like they're the best proof of payment. So we used them all the time. Well, she recognized it. She ended up pulling all of this guy's files, started comparing all of his files, and found out he had used the same canceled checks in a bunch of different files. She tells the owner ends up calling me, he talks to me. I end up convincing the owner that, there was I had no idea what was going on. This was my mortgage broker. Of course, I'm going to have to let this guy go. I'll fire him. He'll be gone. I didn't actually fire him. I just told him, you got to work out of your house for the next couple months. Don't send anything back to Pinnacle Bank. And we'll be fine. He actually was back in the office within a month or two. And listen, I think they even knew that anyway. The point is that I convinced them I didn't know what was going on. And instead of Pinnacle Bank doing the ethical thing and saying, hey, we went back and we found out you've got like $1 million worth of bad loans here, we're going to contact the authorities. They didn't. The owner just said, look, Matt, as long as you promise to, if this comes back on me, any of these bad loans, you're going to promise to help me get rid of these loans or these properties. Like if they have to foreclose, you'll help me sell the property or you'll buy the property back. And I said, no problem. And they'd actually already sold like $1 million or $2 million worth of paper. And they were going to sell worth of these loans from this broker, and they were about to sell another $1 million worth. And they had no problem with it. They was on their credit line. They didn't want to get stuck with it. What do? They sell it. So that happened. And that happened all the time. I got caught one time. I had done I think it was 6 different owner-occupied duplexes where you can't owner-occupy but one dwelling at a time. And we had said that this woman, this real estate agent, was occupying 6 different duplexes at the same time. And we got caught by that lender. I actually convinced the lender to let us refinance all of the duplexes and to give us a short pay, so we don't even pay you what we really borrowed from you, and pay us to do the refis, because they didn't want to call the authorities. They didn't want the authorities going through their stuff. So that was Washington Mutual, actually, I think. Washington Mutual? Yeah. So this was going on all the time. One of the things I had done was I was also basically rehabbing houses. And what that means is I would buy cheap houses for $40,000 or $50,000. There's a really rundown area of Tampa called Ybor City. So I would buy these houses for let's say $50,000. And then I would put $20,000 or $25,000 into the renovations, and then I could sell them for, let's say, $100,000. Maybe I'd make 25 grand. Maybe I'd make 20. Well, if you bought a duplex or a quadplex, you could get even more. Well, my wife at the time, were buying these quadplexes, right? Big triplexes, quadplexes, bigger, apartment buildings. And we would buy them, renovate them, and then refinance them. Well, I was buying properties in my name, renovating them and selling them to her to get around an underwriting guideline called seasoning, which says that you can't refinance a property within 12 months period of time for more than what you purchased it for. Well, I'm purchasing these quadplexes and stuff for like 70, 80,000, let's say, putting 20, 30, 40, 50,000 in them, trying to refinance them at 200,000. So you had to wait a year. I didn't want to wait a year. So I'd buy them in my name, renovate them, sell them to hers and get a new mortgage. Sell them to her and get a new mortgage. And we were running those loans through another company, a company called Creative Financing, which was owned by someone by the name of Pete and Gretchen Zayas. Well, what happened was Pete and Gretchen Zayas got in trouble. They got in trouble running what's called a straw man scam. So they ended up, it's funny because they came to me and said, can you refinance our house and get us $75,000 so we could pay our attorney? I said, sure, no problem. So I refinanced their house and get them $75,000 to give to their attorney. And the first thing their attorney says is, you need to wear a wire and set this guy up. So they wear a wire, they work with the FBI, they set up a little sting. They call me and say, listen, we need you to come to this this pizzeria or meet us for lunch. So I go, no problem. So I meet them for lunch. And I talk to them and say, look, what's going on? And they say, listen, Matt, here's what's going on. The FBI came in, they raided our office, they got a bunch of your files. Now, I knew most of this, but I didn't know they'd gotten their files. They got our files, they are reviewing your files, and they're asking us questions about you and your wife. My wife at the time, her name was Kayla. And they were asking questions about you and Kayla, and I immediately bury myself. Like, I immediately go, oh my God, you didn't tell them that the W-2s are fake. You didn't tell them the pay stubs are fake. You didn't tell them that I own the property. You didn't tell, I just bury myself. And so halfway through this whole thing, I realize that they're wired. I stand up, I go, man, I can't believe this. I was like, you're giving, I hope you're getting something from me. And I remember Gretchen started crying, and she goes, I don't have to go to jail. I have a kid. And I said, well, I've got a kid. What about my kid? And I said, you know what? I said, tell the FBI agent to just call me. So the FBI agent ends up calling my office, literally 10, 15 minutes later. He doesn't even pretend like they weren't wired. So I get up, I leave, I get the phone call, I tell him I gotta get, basically I have to get an attorney. I'll come see you on Monday or Tuesday because he wanted me to come down to the FBI building. So I get an attorney, I pay my attorney $75,000. So I pay this attorney $75,000. And that attorney ends up saying, look, I'm gonna get you a plea deal. He gets me a plea deal for 3 years. Now they wanted to charge my wife. And I said, look, I'll take a plea deal if you don't charge her. We were already having problems. So I knew it wasn't going to get any better if she ended up going to prison or ended up becoming a felony. And I didn't think we were going to go to prison. I never really felt like, hey, I'm going to end up in jail. I didn't think that because there was no dollar loss. By the time, these were good loans. By the time those loans, or they actually were investigating, we'd already bought these properties, renovated them, gotten the new loans, got a bunch of tenants in the properties, and sold the properties. So there was no reason. You couldn't even say the loans didn't even exist. So all it really was bank fraud. Well, my lawyer ends up getting them to give me 3 years for what's called for for wire fraud. So I got one count of wire fraud and I got a 3-year probationary sentence. So I only have to do probation. The problem with that was this. I couldn't run the mortgage company anymore. My wife at the time and we were going through a divorce, and I have to pay $2,000 a month in child support. I had to pay her $100,000 to pay off all these bills, pay off the credit cards, pay her car off. They're all, basically, I ended up with nothing. Not that it was her fault. It was absolutely my fault. The divorce was my fault. All of this was my fault. So I don't want anybody to think, oh, he's blaming other people. I'm not blaming anybody. It's all my fault. So what I should have done at that point was, I really probably should have just closed the mortgage company and went and sold used cars or done something else that I probably would have been able to do. Unfortunately, I didn't do that. I didn't want to move into my parents' spare room. I didn't want to hear my dad tell me I'm a loser or boss my mother around, I didn't want to deal with that. what I decided to do was I said, I'm gonna start renovating properties and selling them. And I sold my business to a guy who was a CPA, and he kept me on as like a consultant, and he paid me $8,000 a month. So that took care of my basic bills. So the problem with renovating properties is this. You renovate properties in the areas where you can pick up properties cheap. You have to sell those properties to people that live in those areas, and people that live in those areas don't have great credit. So my issue with that is this. I'm trying to buy properties, renovate them, and sell them to borrowers that barely qualify, if they qualify at all. And typically they don't qualify. Typically there's some kind of fraud involved. So now I have to continue to commit fraud. So it's like I'm in a position where I had to make a bunch of money all the time just to pay my bills. I have to pay, I've got some rental properties, but the $8,000 wasn't covering it. It probably would have covered it. But at the same time, I'm also being paid the $8,000, so I continue to make fake documents and things for the mortgage brokers that work at my brokerage business or my ex-brokerage business. So I was in a bad spot, one that I could have easily gotten out of, but just out of pure arrogance. Like every bad decision I've ever made is based on arrogance. So just out of pure arrogance, I wouldn't take a step backwards. I was like, no, I'm not going to do this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to run another fucking fraud. Like, no matter what, I'm either walking away from fraud and starting over with nothing, or I'm just going to continue to commit fraud. So I decided I'm going to continue to commit fraud. And what I did was I started making synthetic identities. They're like, phantom, like we call them phantom borrowers or phantom investors. Because I had figured out how to make like a fake credit profile, if that makes sense. I'd met a woman who was using her son's social security number, and she'd built an entire credit profile using her son's social security number. Like she had credit cards, she had a car loan, she had a lease. It was perfect. I had actually gotten her a loan for a house, so I knew it was possible. So what I did was I went into the file cabinets where we had people that had children with getting Social Security disability, or they were taking a tax credit for the children, and so I would have the kid's name and their Social Security number. I took that name, or I took that Social Security number and name, and I would go and pull their credit. Nothing shows up, says no credit profile. So then I would go and I turned around, because I had access to pull credit because of the mortgage company. So then I turned around, I would apply for a couple credit cards in their name. I would get denied. Then I went back and re-pulled their credit, and now those inquiries showed up, and now it didn't say no credit profile found. It said there was a credit profile, and that there had been several inquiries, and it had their address that I'd put in originally, and it had their date of birth, which I put in originally, which wasn't for a 5-year-old kid. I put in a date of birth for somebody who was like a 32-year-old adult. And so now it says this date of birth, this address, this is where the person works. This is, that they've applied for several credit cards, their inquiries, it's got a full profile. I mean, they don't have credit, they've got zero credit, but it appears that they exist. So what I did was I went out and I got several secured credit cards. In each one of these phantom borrowers or these synthetic identities names, I got secured credit cards, and I would get the credit card. So now the credit card company is reporting this name, this date of birth, this address, and that they've got a $500 credit card. Doesn't even say secured. So after you make a few months payments, you suddenly have 700 credit scores. So I'd have 695, 705, 710 credit scores. So I got roughly 700 credit scores on people that don't exist. Now I've got these synthetic identities. And what I did was some of them, initially I was actually named them just regular people, like Alan Duncan, Joel Cologne. But then I started naming them, Lee Black, Michael White, James Red, Brandon Green, David Silver, William Blue. I have all these different coded names, right? Which I thought was cute because I did that because of the movie Reservoir Dogs had come out by Quentin Tarantino, and all the bad guys are these, were named like Mr. Pink, Mr. Black, Mr. Red, Mr. White. So I thought that was cool. It wasn't, but I thought it was pretty cool. So I end up going into this one area, and I buy up a bunch of houses, this area of Ybor City. So I start buying houses for $40,000, for $50,000, but by this point, I'm now divorced. So I'm divorced, I'm dating a chick that worked for a title company. And I convinced her to kind of help me out a little bit, like answer some questions. So she ends up explaining to me, I'm like, how do I end up getting someone how do I end up recording the value of a house higher than what I'm actually buying it for? And so she explains to me that all I have to do is, it's a transaction form that you file when you buy a house with the warranty deed. So she said, get a warranty deed or a deed, a quitclaim deed, whatever, and just pay the extra doc stamps on the purchase, the sale of the house. You pay doc stamps. So if it's a $100,000 sale, you pay $700. If it's a $200 sale, you pay $200,000. I'm sorry. If it's a $200,000 sale, you pay $1,400. Let me do that again. If it's a $100,000 sale, you pay $700 for doc stamps. If it's a $200,000 sale, you pay $1,400. So I started buying houses for $50,000. I should have paid $350 for doc stamps, but I would just pay the extra doc stamps, and it would show up as a sale of $200,000. So instead of paying $350 for $50,000, I'm paying $1,400, and it says that sale was for $200,000. So what's happening is I start buying all these houses for $50,000, $40,000, $30,000, $60,000, $70,000, $50,000, but I'm recording the value of the sales as $200, $210, $190, $170, and I'm buying the houses in the name of synthetic identities, people that don't even exist. So now let's say your name is James Red, or Lee Black, whatever. You're James Red, and you're this synthetic identity. You now bought 5 houses for $50,000 a piece, but I recorded the value much higher, so it looks like you own $1 million in properties. And you have a $700 credit score. And I already knew how to fake someone's employment. I would make the W-2s and pay stubs. I had these guys that would appraise the properties for me. Like I have these appraisers. The appraisers are more than willing to appraise the property at $200,000. Based on the comparable sales, right? So all the sales look like they're $200,000, and I'm buying these houses everywhere in Ybor. So the value in that area, as far as appraisers were concerned, had gone from about $50,000 or $60,000 up to $200,000, all the way to $250,000. At one point, I think I got them all the way up to like $350,000 because I started doing quadplexes. Well, so let's say James Red owns $1 million worth of property, and I would just go in and refinance those properties. So if he bought the house for $50,000, it's valued at $200,000. I then I create a full package for him. I refinance that property with, let's say, Citibank, and they give him a 90% loan on a $200,000 sale because I have a full appraisal. And if they review the appraisal, there's comparable sales everywhere because there's other houses right next door, 2 blocks away, half a mile away that all sold for $210,000, $205,000, whatever. So they believe that his house is worth $200,000. They lend him 90% value on a $200,000 sale. That's $180,000 for a house that I bought for $50,000 and put maybe $10,000 into just the outside of it so it take a good picture. So you take $60,000 minus $180,000, you've got a profit of $120,000. So James Red just made $120,000, and he owns 5 or 6 houses like that. So he makes $600,000 in profit within 3-4 months. Then what would happen is what happens is so many people pulling your credit that your credit score drops from the 710 credit score drops down to like 605, or it could be like 550. Suddenly he's got 5 houses in his name. Then I would turn around and I would go and I'd get a bunch of I get real credit cards in his name. I get personal loans in his name. So I get another $100,000 in credit cards and personal loans. So this guy's maxed out. And then I'd stop paying. I'd make a few mortgage payments and stop paying. What ends up happening is all the collection companies, first the lenders would start sending letters to me saying, hey, what's going on? Well, you got to pay. And then what I would do is, and then eventually maybe they go to a collection company or something. Well, I would then write a letter from his fictitious sister, right? Like James Red's sister would write a letter saying that he had been in a massive car accident, and then I would put an article and then from the newspaper, like I would print it out on newsprint, cut it up, make it look like I cut it out of the newspaper. This was back when they had newspapers. So I would cut it out and I would retype the whole thing, and I'd make it look like James Red had been in a car accident, like a 12-car pileup or something. He'd been life-flighted to Tampa General Hospital. And then she'd write a letter and send them a copy of the article and say, look, my brother was in a car accident. He's in a coma. He'll never work. The doctors say, even if he comes out of the coma, he's never going to work again. So just take the house. So that gave them an explanation for what happened. Like not talking to the collection companies I knew was a bad idea, because if you gave them a good reason why you weren't paying, they would accept that and go away. Now they may come back later, but at least they knew what happened. If you just avoid them, they'll continue to try and find you. And I wanted to give them a reason, so I did. And they would just go away. Keep in mind, I did this over and over and over again. The way I'm doing this whole thing with these people, these synthetic identities, is nobody was going into the bank. What I was doing was I would prepare the document, have the mortgage company close the loan, and then all the paperwork gets sent to a title company or a lawyer. Well, you have to show up and sign all your documents, but I can't have James Red show up and sign his documents because he doesn't exist. Well, what I would do is I would then go to the title company or call them a couple hours beforehand. Like, they want their money, right? Like, they're about to make $500 or $1,000 on this closing. So I would end up calling the title company or the lawyer, whoever, and I would say, listen, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, this guy, James Red or whatever his name was, Lee Black, Brandon Green, whatever. I'm so sorry, but he's busy. He just called me. He had a meeting come up that he'd forgotten about. He can't make he can't make the closing. And they go, oh gosh, we'll have to reschedule. I go, well, wait a minute. I can pick it up. Like, I'll pick up the package and bring it to him. And we can have them sign that way. And they go, oh gosh, man, I'm really supposed to be there to notarize it. And I go, well, I mean, I don't know what you want me, what do you want to do? And they go, I'd say, look, the seller's going to be out of town, or the whatever. Let's say it's a refinance. I'd go, God, he's leaving in a couple of days. It'll be weeks. And they would say, okay, you know what, Matt, you can come pick up the package. I'd go and I'd pick up the package, and then I'd bring it to, James Red and let him sign it. And really, it's just me. I would go and sit at a Starbucks and sign it, or I'd sit in the parking lot and sign it, make some phone calls. And then I would bring it back to them, and I'd make a copy of the driver's license, of this guy's driver's license, which I would order offline, or I would just make it myself. So I've got a picture, and the picture on the driver's licenses I would use would be like some guy I knew who had been arrested. So I knew, like, the guy who did a lot of the cleanup in these properties, like he trimmed trees and stuff. I would use his picture because I knew he'd been arrested. So I would go on Hillsborough County Arrest website and I'd get his picture and put it on the driver's license. The reason I did that was I figured if I ever needed one of these guys to show up, like, I need to know who it is. So I want to be able to go to them. I thought maybe I could convince one of these guys to show up if I have to, but it was working pretty well without them. So, maybe it would be a tenant or something that I knew that had been arrested for a DUI, or had gotten out of jail, or had been arrested a week or, 2-3 years ago for something. Well, I would put that on their driver's license picture. Like, I would literally cut and paste together a driver's license. Using my driver's license, I'd just take it and I'd use that template and change the picture and then all their information. Make a copy, go in, hand it to the title person. They would notarize the document, even though they hadn't seen this person sign anything, because these people don't exist. They would notarize the document and they'd give me the checks. Now, they would then send that package back to the lender. The lender would send out, every month they'd send out a bill, and I'd pay the bill. So the lenders don't realize that this person doesn't exist, because they're getting mortgage payments for at least 3 or 4 months. And then suddenly this person would have a tragic car accident and they'd stop paying. And when the lenders would start calling, their employer still, when the lenders would call to contact their employer or to try and contact them at work, the employer was still there. Like, I had dummy companies that would answer the phone. So I've got these answering services that are answering the phone and rerouting the phone calls to me if they want to talk to their manager. And so they would just say, I'm sorry that he doesn't work here anymore. Like, I would call them up and say, listen, I have a list of employees, and I would say, look, if anybody calls for James Green, he doesn't work here anymore. And they would tell them that, and then I'd shut off their phone. So they can't get in touch with anybody, but their employer still is there. So the documents are still good. If they did a review of the house still looks good. It still looks like it's worth it because all the comparables are there. So there was no way for them to figure out it was a fraud. Not that they didn't figure it out. I mean, every once in a while, something would go wrong, and I'd get caught. And I was caught by a company called, oh gosh, what was the name of that company one time? God, that was funny. It was South Star Bank. South Star Bank caught me one time as a guy named, I want to say it was Alan Duncan. Like, for some reason, one of the guys that was kind of involved in the scam with me, like, I was always writing paying for these mortgage payments. And, it got excessive. And we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, of mortgages. So I'm making payments. I mean, it's not like I'm paying 5 bills a month. I'm paying, 40, 50 more different well, not all mortgages, but mortgages, credit card payments, personal loans, home equity lines of credit. So, car payments. I mean, I'm paying all kinds of bills that we're getting things financed. I mean, everybody's driving a new car. We even bought an underwriter one time that worked for a company called United Capital Lending. We actually bought the guy, we bought him a Mercedes, like a convertible Mercedes. I think they called them Mercedes, they called them like compressors or something like that, a Mercedes compressor, a little tiny 2-seater Mercedes, cute little Mercedes. He was a gay guy, he wanted it, had red interior. The guy was helping us out with loans, so you want a Mercedes, you get a Mercedes. I mean, I'm making $100,000 a month with this guy. So he got a Mercedes. Well, one time South Star Bank caught one of my guys, Alan Duncan. Caught this guy, Alan Duncan. And what ends up happening with Alan Duncan is that one of the other guys working with me was supposed to make the mortgage payments. And the very first mortgage payment he never made. And the guy's an idiot. He was a real estate agent, and he was helping me out. He had made, I gave him like 20 or 30 grand. I said, look, I'm going to give you like 30 grand, but do me a favor, you got to make the first few payments on this thing, right? Make 3 payments, we'll stop paying. The first payment he didn't even make. So immediately it's called the first payment default. They investigate the loan. They figure out that Alan Duncan does not exist. Well, what happens is they then call the account executive. Their account executive calls the loan officer that did the loan. I wasn't the loan officer. It went through somebody else. She calls me and says, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe this. They know it's fraud." So I end up going to the office and I call up South Star Bank and I tell them I want to talk to like the vice president or president, whoever it was, I forget. And they put me through, and I'm on the phone with him, the president of the bank. And it was like the vice president or president of the bank, and then it was like their fraud, the guy head of their fraud department, and then it was their lawyer. And I'm on the phone. I'm like, "Hey, this is Alan Duncan. I understand. I missed my first mortgage payment, but I'm going to pay it right now." Like, it wasn't even. I don't even think it wasn't even 30 days late. It was just like 3 weeks late or something. I'm going to overnight it right now. And they were like, "Absolutely not. First of all, you don't even exist." And I was like, "Oh man, this is bad." And they said, "We know this is completely a fraud. We're going to call the FBI. We're going to do this. We're going to do that." And I end up talking to them, and I convince them that if they call the FBI, they're never going to get their money back. And then they're like, well, no, we're going to get our money back once they foreclose on the house. So then I go, no, you don't seem to understand. And I explain, they actually had the appraisal. I go, pull out the appraisal. Do you see comp number 1? They're like, yeah. I'm like, that's owned by a guy named James Red. Go to comp number 2. Okay. That's owned by a guy named Lee Black. Go to comp number 3. That's owned by a guy named, like Michael White. And they were like, holy shit. I said, now all of those, I explained to them that I recorded the value at like 4 or 5 times what I bought the houses for, which is the same thing I did with this house. So I very clearly lay out the entire scam. And I tell them, look, you're never getting your money back. Like, the only way you're going to get your money back is if I give it to you. And the only way I'm going to give it to you is if you assure me that you're not going to contact the authorities. So they come back and we go back and forth, and they eventually convince me that, look, we're not going to call anybody, just give us the money back. I go get a cashier's check. I then overnight them the money. They get the money back. They never did call anybody. And then I end up throwing away that, completely trashing that identity. Regardless, I still think we borrowed over $1 million in Alan Duncan's name, and probably made $500,000 or $600,000 in his name. So I'm committing fraud. Things are going good. I know it doesn't sound like that, but things are actually going good. I'm putting out fires. Everything is great. What ends up happening is I end up having a couple of buddies. Like, everybody's seeing me make money now. Like, I have like ridiculous amount of money, right? So it's like at this point, we've borrowed $11.5 million over the course of a couple of years. We've made a profit of we made a profit of $6 million. I've got multiple cars. I'm going on vacations. I'm meeting. It's like I met some chick one time at a wedding, and a week later, maybe 4 or 5 days later, I take her to Mexico for a week. I'm going to Europe for a week. I'm with a different chick. It's like literally like I'm doing great. Going on vacations. I've got plenty of money. I'm buying whatever I want. I'm banging all these chicks that I never should have been banging. I mean, chicks that are way out of my league. Things are good. And I have a buddy come to me, and his name is Travis. I'd known him forever. So Travis comes to me, and he knows what's going on. He wants to run a scam with me. And I say, okay, we can run a scam. He goes, look, I got to make some money. I say, okay. He goes, I want to do what you're doing. So we create a synthetic identity for him, and we have him go to Orlando and buy some houses. I think he buys a couple houses. We refinance those houses, and he starts pulling cash out of that. He opens 2 or 3 banks. He starts pulling money out of the bank. In the meantime, I was dating a chick by the name of Allison, and Allison wants to do something too. She's like, you've got all this money. She's going through a divorce. I'm sleeping with her. Shoot, I'm sleeping with her. Sleeping with all these, just a bunch of different girls. But Allison was one of them, and she wants to run a scam. So we end up getting someone's ID, and we buy a house in that ID's name, and then she refinances that house several times. And I want to say she did like 2 or 3 closings. Well, at one of the closings, at one of the closings, she goes to the closing, the title person looks at her ID and says, this doesn't look like you. Now here's the thing. The name we had used was Rosita Perez. So it should be a Spanish girl. Allison has, blondish brown hair, blue eyes, fair skin. And what I had done for the picture, I had her go and get her hair dyed black and curled. So that was the picture on the ID. The problem was, a few days before the actual closing, she went and got her hair changed back to brown with blonde streaks. So when she showed up, she looked slightly different than the picture, but it was still her. Well, the person at the title company looked at the picture and went, "This isn't you." And Allison was like, "No, that's me. It was her." No, she goes, "This doesn't look like you. Something's wrong here. I'm not going to give you the check. I'm going to make some phone calls. I'll let you know." So Allison bolts, gets in the car. She's like, "Oh my God, drive." So we take off. And we had closed one loan already for, I don't know if it was $100,000 or $200,000. I'm going to say it was $100,000. And Allison's supposed to get like half that money. That's like 50 grand. So, to be honest with you, I think it was more than 100. I think it was like 190,000. Doesn't matter. Point is that we didn't have a bank account and we were freaked out. So, in Rosita Perez's name. So what we did was Allison was like, call Travis. So we called Travis and I explained the situation to Travis. And Travis said, "Give me the check. I'll cash it." And I was like, "Nah, bro, you don't understand." And I explained it to him. He goes, "It's fine. Give me the check." He said, "I know the guy at the bank. It'll be fine." I said, he goes, "What do you think we should do?" I said, "I think we should walk away." Allison, of course, doesn't want to walk away because she's going to make a chunk of it, $50,000 or $100,000 on this one check. Like, that's a huge amount of money for her. And nothing led back to her. Like, all of these are burner phones. Everything goes to abandoned houses or UPS or to not post office boxes, but private mailboxes. Like, nothing leads to us. So we give the check to, I'm going to say we give the check to Travis. Travis goes to the bank. He deposits it. They say they're going to hold the check for a few days, which back then was a normal thing. Plus his account was new. So a few days later, Allison comes to me and says, "Hey, what's going on with the check?" I called Travis. I go, "Hey man, what's up with that check?" And he says, "Oh, I'm actually on my way to the bank right now." And I said, "Oh." He goes, "But I'm not getting any money." I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." And he was pulling in the parking lot. And he said, yeah, they just called me up and said they wanted me to come by. They want to witness because it's over $100,000. I remember that too, because it must have been $200,000 because they were like, because they told him because it was over $100,000, they had to witness him sign the check. Now, I've endorsed many, many checks for over $100,000. I've endorsed checks for $200,000, $250,000. Like, they don't need to see you do it. So he goes, they want to see me because it was a check that's over $100,000. They want to witness me sign it. And I said, that doesn't sound right, bro. And I said, don't go in the bank. The cops are going to be waiting for you. He goes, what are you talking about? He goes, there's no cops here. I'm in the parking lot right now. And I remember he said, bro, stop shaking. You're shaking like a little girl. Calm down. And he goes, it'll be fine. And he hangs up the phone. He goes in the bank. He gets arrested. Like, he walks in, presents the check, and I don't know if the cops were in there, but they walk in right behind him, close the door, lock it, walk up to him, handcuff him, bring him down to the police station, and they ask him what's going on. And he tells them, look, I'm running a scam with this guy, this friend of mine. His name's Matt Cox. He's already on probation. Like, I was already on probation. So they look me up. They then look up all of the properties that I've been buying and selling and letting go into foreclosure and refinancing. So he tells them about the scam. They go and they look up, the name white, blue, red, silver, green. So you got purchases. 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, they're in foreclosure. So it's not hard. Look, this guy owns 5 houses. This guy owns 6 houses. This guy owns 5 houses. This guy owns 5 houses. This guy owns 6 houses. So, and all of them, foreclosure. So they very quickly go, oh, okay, this is definitely a scam. And he's like, look, they're like, how much money is it? He's like, over $10 million at this point. Like, it's like $11.5 million. He had just borrowed something like $450,000. So, they know it's a big deal. They let him out. I remember too, he called me. I got him. I paid for his attorney. And then over the next month or probably 3 months, he comes to me constantly asking me for money. I gave him another $25,000 over the next few months. Gave him money to start a tree trimming business, which he runs to this day. So I'm desperate to try and keep him from saying anything. Of course, he's telling me he said nothing, but in actuality, he's working with the task force, a task force that was put together in the different counties, Hillsborough County, Pinellas, whatever the other counties were. I forget that, Orange? No, I don't know, Dade, I don't know. But all these other counties, because I was all over Florida at this point. So they put it together under the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and they are investigating me. And I very quickly realized that I'm being investigated. Within a few months of this, I'm realizing it, because now I'm starting to get phone calls from title companies saying, hey, we just got something from the FDLE saying they're subpoenaing all of your records. So they're now subpoenaing my records. I also start getting phone calls from a reporter with the St. Petersburg Times named Jeff Testerman. So, I mean, it's a big deal. Like, I realized things are starting to fall apart. But I kept thinking it would be okay. Like, I don't know, you just never think I am an eternal optimist, and I thought I was going to be all right. I wasn't all right, and everything was falling apart, but I didn't realize that until I suddenly get a guy that comes to me. His name was Steve Sutton. He was a sheriff's deputy for Hillsborough County Sheriff's Deputy. He comes to me and he says, listen, Matt, I got to talk to you. I'm like, all right, what's up, bro? And he says, here's the problem. I used to date this chick on the Tampa Police Department, and she came to my house this morning, and she told me, Steve walked into my office in full, his full sheriff's deputy gear, and he's like, look, man, here's the issue. She said, this girl I used to date on Tampa PD was on a task force. The task force was investigating you. Because you've done a bunch of loans for me, my name came up, so she came to me and told me not to talk to you anymore because they had just handed over the task force findings to the FBI, and the FBI is going to come and arrest you. And I was like, when? He goes, within a few days. That was a Thursday at 4 o'clock. So I remember immediately he was like, what are you going to do? I was like, bro, what do you mean what am I going to do? I can't go to jail. Look at me. I'm adorable. I can't go to prison. So I figured I'm taking off. And so I end up, within about a day, I was able to pull out $80,000 in cash. I would write checks to people and they would go cash the checks. And I walked in and asked for $8,000 in cash. So, I didn't have that many bank accounts in my own name. And most of most of the money we had taken was in corporate accounts, or they were in properties that we had bought. We had a bunch of properties, and we were also investing this money into real estate. So we've got 100 vacant lots. We've been just dumping money into buying lots in this area because we were also building 2 brand new houses. We've got a ton of money that is just everywhere. So I got out 80 grand. I probably could have we probably had $1 million in the bank, but I just didn't have time. So what I end up doing is I pull out the money, I start packing a bag I'm leaving. And this girl that I was dating, her name was Rebecca Hauk. Rebecca shows up at my house and she's like, what are you doing? What do you mean, what am I doing? I'm leaving. She goes, for what? And I was like, look, and I explain exactly what's happening. Here's what's happening. And so she's like, oh my gosh, but I like you so much. Listen, we've been dating about a month and a half. I've slept with this girl maybe 5 or 6 times. And she's like, I really like you, and I want, and I tell her I'm leaving. I tell her what's going on, exactly what's going on. Here's what's happening. FBI is going to come arrest me. I'm on federal probation, which she knew anyway. And she says, I want to come with you. So I was like, well, you don't want to come with me. You have a whole life here. You have a kid here. You have, she had a 13-year-old kid, and she was like, no, you don't understand. His father has basically raised him. He's only been with me for 6 months. Because she had just come down from Las Vegas. She goes, I came from Vegas because things weren't going good for me. These were all things I didn't know. One, she took her son because she thought she could raise him. She couldn't. He had gotten in the last month or so, he'd been caught after curfew twice. She caught him smoking pot. He's failing school. She's flipping out. She's like, I was going to send him back to live with his father anyway. I'm in love with you. I want to come with you. And she said, and I was like, look, you understand, I'm going to commit fraud. I'm going to steal $3, $4, $5 million and leave the country or something. And she was like, I don't care. I want to come with you. And I was like, look, to be honest with you, this isn't even love. I'm not even in love with you. And she goes, I don't care. I just want to know, can you get the money? I was like, yeah, I can get the money. And she goes, well, then I'm coming with you. And I didn't really even know this girl. But I was getting up and moving away from everybody is scary. And I was going to be alone. And I didn't have to be alone. And she could help me with the scams. Not that she ever did, really. She was like pretty much useless. But I ended up saying, okay, so we pack my bags, we pack her bags. She puts her son on a plane back to his father. And then we run up my credit cards and we take off on the run. We go straight to Atlanta. I remember I wrote a letter to my mom and dad. I wrote a letter saying, hey, this is what's happening. I'm leaving. I'll try and stay in touch. I love you. See ya. Wrote a letter to my ex-wife and to my son. I felt like if the FBI arrested me, I was going to end up in prison. And I probably convinced myself of this. I felt like I was never going to see my son again. So I kind of convinced myself that leaving was the best thing, and I would have rather him thought of me as this romantic character that was out, like a Bonnie and Clyde kind of thing, as opposed to rotting away in prison and his mom won't let him come see me. And it was just stupid on my part. So we take off, and at this point, you have to understand, at this point, I've figured out how to get Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers to like kids that don't exist, right? So what I did was I just called Social Security about 10 times with multiple scenarios. I'm not going to go through all the scenarios, but I eventually figure out that if you can give Social Security a shot record for a child who's, let's say, under the age of 12 months old, because the kid's over 12 months old, you have to show up with the kid. So if you give them a shot record and you give them a birth certificate and you go into Social Security and tell them you have a kid who's 10 or 11 months old or 2 months old, whatever, was not born in a hospital, was born with what's called a midwife at home and has never had a Social Security number issued, Social Security will issue you a Social Security number using only a shot record and a birth certificate in any name you want. Because you have to think, first of all, you can name your kid whatever you want. It doesn't have to have the mother or father's last name. You can just name whatever. You could call your kid, Spawn of Satan. They would be like, all right, well, Spawn of Satan, here's his birth certificate. So I would always name the kid so I could name the kid whatever I want, right? Like James Red, Michael White, whatever. And so I would say like the mother's name was White, my name was whatever name I said my name was, because I'm providing a fake driver's license. Well, you have to think by this point I've already figured out how to get a fake driver's license. Like if I could steal someone's identity, I can go into the DMV with someone else's information and get a driver's license. So I was able to get Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers for children that don't exist and use them to build synthetic credit profiles in which I could then turn around and borrow millions of dollars in those profiles' names. And that's what I was doing. I was buying houses and refinancing the houses and pulling out millions of dollars and then letting the houses go into foreclosure. And the banks never had any idea that they were being defrauded. So now I'm on the run and I'm getting Social Security to issue me Social Security numbers, creating synthetic identities, and we go straight to Atlanta and Becky and I rent a house. And we rent a house. And I then go downtown and I go to the real estate public records office, pull up the public records on this house, find out that the guy has 2 mortgages with Bank of America on his house. I then create a synthetic identity with the same name as the owner of the house. I then create a satisfaction of mortgage and I record the satisfaction of mortgage in public records and I satisfy both loans on his house. So now I'm living in a house with the name Michael Shanahan. I'm Michael Shanahan, and the true owner of the house's name is Michael Shanahan, and I've satisfied the loans on the house. Now, the true loans aren't really satisfied. It's just a piece of paper. Like when Bank of America lends you a mortgage on your house, they just record it in public records saying, hey, there's a mortgage on this house. This is what he owes us. When you pay that off, Bank of America mails in a document that says this loan is now satisfied. They know it's satisfied. Public records now knows it's satisfied. The owner knows it's satisfied. In this case, I create that satisfaction of mortgage from Bank of America, which they didn't create. It's fake. I then give it to public records. They record it. So public records thinks that mortgage is satisfied. But the true owner is still paying his mortgage to Bank of America, and Bank of America thinks they still have a recorded lien on the property. But I know better. So what I do is I turn around using a fake ID, and I go and I borrow $150,000 from 3 different hard money lenders. A hard money lender is just a guy that's got money, and he lends money based on the value of the house. So I call 3 hard money lenders. They come out to the house. They look at the house. They go, the house is worth about $200,000. I'll lend you $150,000. And I go, sounds like a deal. I then close all 3 of those loans. I make $450,000. I deposit that money into multiple different bank accounts, and I then pull that money out of the bank, and I've got the money. And then when the hard money guys start to foreclose, they're foreclosing on Michael Shanahan, who says, I don't know what you're talking about. And when they meet Michael Shanahan in person or look at him, they go, wow, you're not the same guy that we met. You're not the guy. And he's like, no, I rented that out to some girl. I own that house, but I rented it out. They're like, no, we just refinance. I just lent you $150,000 on that house. Of course, they know it's not him, so the whole thing kind of falls apart at that point. Well, during the process of this whole thing, at one point, I'd refinanced the house and I had the money and I was cashing checks, right? So I would go to the closing and I would ask them to cut me checks to multiple different people. Like, can you cut me a check for $7,000 to this person and $4,000 to this person? Well, I had one check that was for $29,000, which was made out to a guy named Scott Cugno. So Scott Cugno was someone that I had stolen his identity. So it's a real person. And I had so I had a real driver's license, an Alabama driver's license in his name, because by this point if I stole someone's identity, and I would steal people's identities periodically, especially when I was on the run, because I have to buy a house, I have to drive, I have to get a real driver's license in your name. So if I get pulled over, I can't have a fake ID and give it to a cop. He's going to know immediately this is a fake ID. Like, get out of the car, you're under arrest. So what I did was I started running ads in newspapers, and it was like good credit, bad credit, no problem, home loans available, free applications, call now. And people would call, and I would get their information, and then I'd use that information to order their copy of their birth certificate and their social security card. I'd get their social security card, get their driver's license record, and find out if they ever had a driver's license, of course, in any other states. And if they only had like one in, let's say, Tennessee, then I'd go to Alabama and I get a driver's license in their name. Because I have a copy of their birth certificate, I have a copy of their social security card, and I have a copy of their driving record from let's say, Tennessee. I get a copy of their high school transcript. I'd register to vote in Alabama, and I'd walk in with all these documents, and I'd say, hey, I just moved here a few months ago. I need to get a driver's license, and I give them the documents, and they'd say, okay, no problem. They take my picture. I pay them $40, $50, whatever it is, $20 back then, I think, $20, $25. They take my picture. That's it. Because they're not able to instantly pull up your picture in, let's say, Alabama from Tennessee, because there's a hub system. It's complicated, but basically all they could really do is see that you had a valid driver's license. I've got all your documents, I get a driver's license. So at this point, I've now refinanced this guy Michael Shanahan's property. I've got a check for $29,000. I've cashed a bunch of checks. At this point, I've cashed like $400,000 worth of checks. So I go into the bank. I tell the bank teller I want $29,000. We've been doing under $10,000 because we didn't want to fill out a cash transaction report, but it was taking a long time. And so I walk into the bank. Becky's waiting in the car. I walk in the bank and I say, hey, my name's Scott Cugno. I need to cash this check. They look at the check and they go, well, it's $29,000. That's a lot. And I go, yeah, but you're a cash transaction bank. From my understanding, you can cash the check. And she said, yeah, we can. That's true. Hold on. So she says, have a seat in my manager's cubicle. So I go sit in this little cubicle. I'm sitting in the cubicle. The guy, eventually the manager comes out with a check and my ID. He's got my ID. He's got like my credit card. It's a real credit card. He's got my ID. The name's Scott Cugno. And he's got the check. And he goes, okay, well, what do you need the check cash for? And I was like, well, I mean, I need to cash a check because, I need the cash. And he's like, why don't you just deposit it? And I went, well, because my bank is a small bank and it's in Florida and they'll hold the funds. It's a cashier's check. Like, the check's good, right? And he was like, yeah, no, it's good. He goes, we just have to ask some questions. And I was like, okay, well, it's made out to me. I just need the cash. And he goes, okay. Okay, so then he leaves. Then he comes back and he goes, what do you need? What are you cashing the check for? I was like, man, bro, I said, I work for a construction company. Well, I told him like a labor company that provides labor for construction companies. And this construction company I work for, they did some work, and I cash a lot of our laborers' checks because otherwise they get charged like 10% of these check cashing companies. So I cash the checks, cash the checks for them. That was a standard thing. And I had a business card that said I worked for like a labor company. And so he goes, okay, that makes sense. Then he leaves and he comes back. He asks me another question. And then he leaves and he comes back. And I remember Becky kept calling me from the car. Oh my God, what's going on? What's going on? And I was like, look, calm down. The guy's being a dick. He won't give me the money, but I'm taking care of it. And she's like, oh my God, get out of the bank. And I'm like, I can't get out of the bank. He's got a $29,000 check plus my driver's license plus my credit card. He'll call the police. Like, that's a sure way to get the police called. So I have to wait. I have to play it out. So I wait and I wait. Then he comes back, asks some more questions, goes back. Then all of a sudden, I get a phone call. And I pick up the phone and I go, hello? And it wasn't Becky. Like, I knew Becky's number. So I go, hello? And the girl's like, hi, this is Kimberly from SunTrust Bank. Is this Michael Shanahan? And I was like, yes, this is Michael Shanahan. She goes, hi, Mr. Shanahan. We have someone in the bank trying to cash a large check. We just need to verify the payee. And I was like, oh, I said, that's Scott Cugno. I believe the check. I said, yeah, the check's for like $29,000. It's Scott Cugno. And she goes, oh, okay. We just had to verify it with you. I was like, okay. I said, how did you get this phone number? That bank had called the title company. The title company had given them the phone number to Michael Shanahan. I'm Michael Shanahan. So they called Michael Shanahan to verify Scott Cugno's, what Scott Cugno had was allowed to cash this check. And so I verified, I hang up the phone. 5 minutes later, they come out, they walk out. This woman, I assume it's the same girl that called me, and the bank manager comes out and he counts out $29,000 in cash. And I sit there and I go, okay. And I take the money. I remember I'm stuffing the money in my pockets. And I stand up and I remember he says, he goes, so he said, listen, Mr. Cugno, he said, I'd like to let you know I feel very apprehensive about this transaction. I go, really? Well, what is it exactly? And he goes, I can't put my finger on it, but I feel like something's wrong. And I go, it'll come to you. And I walk off and I get in my car and I drive off. We cash $450,000. Maybe not quite 450, but a little over 400,000, 420,000 maybe. There were some closing costs. Anyway, we cash a bunch of checks. And we take off. I take off, and like a week or two later, the Secret Service show up, and they go to the house. And we're already gone. We then immediately go to Charlotte, North Carolina. We rent a fucking nice condo in this high rise. I then so I relocated there. And by this point, I'm on the Secret Service's most wanted list. There have been probably 10, maybe 15 articles in the St. Petersburg Times. Tampa Tribune has written articles. Now suddenly there's newspaper articles and I'm on the news in Atlanta. But it's not national. Like, I'm not that worried about it at this point. We relocate in Charlotte, North Carolina. I then go to Columbus, South Carolina, and I buy 2 houses in Columbus in the name of a guy named Gary Sullivan. Now, Gary Sullivan, I was surveying homeless people at this point. So at this point, I'm now, Becky and I had been driving around, and we were, I was concerned because I would get people's identities, and I would get a driver's license in their name. My fear was I had talked to one guy who had like a DUI, and a lot of people get DUIs, and my fear was, well, what if I get pulled over and this guy's got a DUI? Like, he has a DUI, and I don't even know it, and I get arrested because his license has been suspended. And you have to think, we've got multiple cars, and we've got like 3 vehicles in somebody's name. Like, at this point, I was a guy named Michael Eckert. I was living as Michael Eckert. And so we've got 3 vehicles in the name Michael Eckert. Becky's living as someone else. We have driver's licenses in other people. Becky's a lunatic at this point. Like, she turns out she's bipolar. I tried to get her on medication, Zoloft. She wouldn't take it. She'd take it for a month or 2, and then she'd get off it again. She would say, "Oh, I feel fine. I'm okay." And then she didn't like the way it made her feel, and then she'd be okay for a few months, and she'd get off it, and she'd go ballistic. And I mean ballistic, like screaming fits at 2 in the morning in like a $500,000 condo it's probably $1 million condo now, but in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the police would come. Like, I'd have to take off before the cops get there, because if the cops show up and there's 2 people there on domestic violence, like, somebody's going to jail. So, it was just a nightmare with her. At one point, I actually kicked her out of the house or the apartment, and made her get her own apartment. I mean, she's got a couple of vehicles, like, she's got tons of money. She's going on little vacations. She and I are going on vacations. We go to New Orleans. We go to Bermuda, or we went to Jamaica. We're traveling. We've got nice things. We're doing good. And one point we go to Las Vegas, and I'm now interviewing homeless people, because I figured that way they're not going to get a DUI. So I survey a few homeless people, and I start to get the lay of the land, and I realize that these guys don't get DUIs because they don't have vehicles, because they don't drive. They just panhandle. They live in the woods in a tent somewhere. So I would survey these guys and give them like $20, and then I get all their information and go get a driver's license in their name. So I ended up surveying this guy in Las Vegas, and his name was Gary Sullivan. And while I surveyed him, he ended up telling me that he had been arrested several times for prostitution. So he was a homeless prostitute. I steal his identity. I get a South Carolina ID in his name. I then go and I buy 2 houses in Columbus, South Carolina. I then go down to public records and I satisfy the loans on those houses. One of the houses is worth like $110,000, and one of them is worth like $225,000. I then refinance those houses, and I borrow $1.3 million in those houses, on those houses. So I've got like 5 or 6 loans on each house. During the course of this, I'm pulling out money. I also, at this point, God, there were so many things going on. At this point, I've set up several dummy corporations. So I've got several corporations, and I have bank accounts in those corporations' names. I need those because I'm depositing so many checks and pulling out so much cash. I need like a dozen or so bank accounts. I end up refinancing this one house, and as I'm refinancing it, I get a phone call. Like, I'd refinanced it several times. It ended up that one title company had contacted another title company to get an existing title policy, not realizing that there were other title companies doing loans also, and they end up finding out that another loan had been taken out on that house. So they contact the first mortgage holder on that property, which was Washington Mutual. So Washington Mutual says, "Hey, listen, I'm at home one day and Gary Sullivan's phone rings." So I answered. I go, "Hey, this is Gary Sullivan." They're like, "Hey, this is it was a lawyer for Washington Mutual," and he's like, "Mr. Sullivan, it turns out we have a first mortgage on this property, but the problem is we're not in first lien position. Like they were in like second lien or third lien, but there were other loans before theirs, and they figured it out, just by accident." So I'm like, "Oh wow, like that's a problem, that was an issue." So I said, "Have you contacted anybody?" They said, "No, we're hoping there's an explanation." I said, "You know what?" I said, do me a favor." I said, listen, let's do this. I go, "Let's do this. Let me call you back. I'm going to go to my lawyers, and I'm going to have my lawyer call me or call you." So he goes, "Okay." I hang up the phone. I could drive to my lawyer's office. It's like 45 minutes to an hour away, all the way back in Columbus. So go all the way back to Columbus. I go there, no problem. I talk to my lawyer, and there's a lawyer and a criminal lawyer. So my corporate lawyer brings in his partner, which is a criminal lawyer. They sit down and I go, "Okay." They go, "Well, what happened? What's going on?" And I explain to them, "Look, I borrowed like 5 loans on this property." They figured out there's a loan before theirs, 1 or 2 loans before they're in third position or something. And they're like, "Oh my God." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." I said, "That's a major problem." I said, "But I've already talked to the guy, and I said I've convinced him to let me just pay him back, and they won't call the authorities." And so the lawyer's like, "Okay." I said, "I just need you to get him to say that and get that on paper, and we'll be done with it." And so they go, "Okay." So they call the guy and they go, "Look, can you just can you let him pay it back?" And they're like, "Yeah, no problem. We'll have them just pay it back. We don't want to call anybody. We just want this guy to pay it back, the money back. No problem." Okay. So I say, "Okay, I'm going to go get the cashier's check." And as I'm leaving, like, the corporate lawyer looks at me and he goes, "Listen, Gary," he said, "the problem is you got like 4 other mortgages on this property." And I went, "Right?" And this wasn't even a big loan. This was like $100,000. And he goes, "Well, what happens if these other lenders find out that they're not in first position and they want the money back?" And I went, "Well, then I leave town." And both the lawyers start laughing. And they're like, ha 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 ha. So they look at me and they're like, "Gary, that'll never work. Like, they have your name, your date of birth, your social security number. The FBI will find you." And I said, "Well, you're assuming my name is Gary Sullivan." And I remember the look on their face, like it was like the blood drained from their face. And when they realized, wow, like, who was sitting in front? Who is this guy? And I remember thinking, like, they don't meet a lot of guys like me. And I said, "Listen," and I remember the corporate lawyer goes, "Well, we'll cross that road when we come to it." I said, "Exactly what my current issue is, paying these guys off." I said, "So let me go get the check. I'll come back." I go get the cashier's check. I come back. He calls them, sends them a copy of the check. They're like, "Hey, we're good. Just send us the check. No problem. Cashier's check. No problem. This whole thing will be dead. No problem." So I remember too, because I remember the corporate lawyer goes, "Well, we need to talk about our fee." I go, "Well, you've got about an hour into this, 2 hours into it. What do I owe you?" And the guy goes, "Well, I was thinking $1,500. And I go, "No problem." So I pull out a wad of cash. I start counting out $1,500. And he goes, "Well, Gary, we don't usually take cash." And I said, "After what you just heard," I said, "you'd take a check from me?" And he kind of rocked his head and he goes, "Yeah, I'll take the cash." So I give him the cash, I leave, I end up pulling the rest of the money out. I'm pulling the money out of that scam, I'm cashing checks, everything's going good. So I end up going into, at this point I've got $500,000-$600,000 pulled out of this bank. or out of this scam, I've still got like $600,000. And you have to understand that sounds like, hey, these guys have like over $1 million because they just made 400,000 here. They left with 80,000. They've got another 600,000 or 700,000. But you have to understand, we gave money to Becky's parents. Becky had all the money. We're buying brand new cars. We're living in $500,000 condos, probably $750,000 condos. We've got 2 of these that we're living in these. We're paying our rents are $2,000-$3,000 a month. We have car payments. We're going on vacations. We're staying at the Ritz-Carlton Arms. We're flying first class. We've got Rolexes. We've got Cartier watches. We've got, we're buying, our blue jeans are $200-$300 a piece. We're spending a ton of money. We would go on vacation to New Orleans for 2 weeks. We'd go to Disney World for 2 weeks. Like, these aren't vacations like your normal vacation that costs you $3,500. This is a $12,000 vacation. We're going here, there. So we're blowing through the money. One day I go in the bank, went into a Wachovia. So I walk into this Wachovia bank. I'm cashing like nothing. It's like $6,000 check. It's nothing. And I walk up to the teller. I give her my Gary Sullivan ID. She looks spooked, a little bit spooked. But I'd actually gone to this teller several times. And because my account was new, every time I asked for more than like $3,000, she always had to go in the back and call to get verification, to get it like a verification, or not verification, sorry, to get an approval. So she goes, okay. She takes my deposit and she walks in the back. I'm waiting. She comes back out. She goes in the back. I'm waiting. And all of a sudden, some guy reaches behind me and reaches over my shoulder and grabs my arm and yanks it behind my back. And somebody grabs me to the other one. I'm like, what the hell? Guys pull my arms back. And I mean, this guy is like a tree trunk. Like, he's just massive. And he pulls them back. They handcuff me. I turn around. There's 2 deputies standing there. And they go, Mr. Sullivan, you're currently under arrest. I need you to come this way. So they grab my ID and the deposit and everything, or they grab the ID and they walk me into the manager's office and sit me down. And listen, there's tons of people in this bank. It's totally crowded. So what ends up happening is I'm sitting there like I'm freaking out. I'm thinking, this is it. I'm already on the Secret Service's most wanted list. I'm on the FBI's most wanted list. I'm on the US Marshals most wanted list. Like, they're looking for me. They're going to my family's house. They're all over the place. So I'm freaking out. I know I'm in trouble. It's a problem. Well, what happens is they sit me down. I'm like, what's going on? And the 2 deputies are like, we really don't know. We were told to detain you. And so I wasn't under arrest. I was just being detained. So I'm sitting there, no big deal. And I wait and wait. They go, we're waiting for the detective to come. And I remember thinking that would be like the FBI agent. Because I don't know the difference between a detective, an investigator, an agent, a marshal. Like, I don't know. So all of a sudden this guy comes in and he looks like an FBI agent, but he says, he's in a gray suit and he says, hey, he said, look, my name is whatever. Let's say, Detective Anderson or something. He's like, my name's, Detective Anderson. I forget his name, but Detective Anderson, he said, Mr. Sullivan, he said, we got a complaint from Wachovia, the head of their fraud department. He said that you're running, like, you've got 3 mortgages on a piece of property. And I go, is that illegal? And the guy goes, I'm not sure. And I remember thinking, I'm walking out of here. Like, I'm leaving. Well, all I got to do is to convince this guy I haven't done anything wrong. And I'm at this point, my adrenaline shot through my fucking, the top of my head. I'm ready to go. Like, let's do this. I'm going to talk my way out of this. And so he sits down with me and he says, you're being detained. And I go, well, I feel like I'm under arrest. And he goes, no, you're not under arrest. And I show him my handcuffs. Like, I hold my handcuffs like, hey, well, look at this. And he goes, oh, you take those off. So he goes, yeah, I'm sorry. He goes, you didn't have to do that. So they uncuff me. They get head of Wachovia's fraud department on the phone. And he describes what happened to a T. But he doesn't realize that I've actually got like 6 mortgages on this property. 6 or 7, really. Like, the original mortgage, the wraparound mortgage, which was satisfied, then the 5 other mortgages that I borrowed. So the mortgage is like it's got like, I don't know what it is, 600,000-700,000 on this one property, maybe closer to $1 million. So I got 5. They were all about 190,000. There's close to $1 million on this one property. Now I've already pulled out a ton of the money. So he says, he gets to the guy on the phone. The guy says, listen, he's running a scam. Like, he's got 3 mortgages on this property. We're supposed to be in first lien position. And so, this is a scam. Like, and so I went, well, what do you mean? What is it? I don't understand. And he said, yeah, he says he closed these 3 loans so quickly, we never caught it. But now we've caught it. And so the detective looks at me and goes, well, what is that? I said, no, bro, listen. I said, I came here to Wachovia and I applied for a loan. And I said, that's all I know is I applied for a few different loans at different companies because I was told to. And he says, he's running a scam. It's a scam. And he goes, okay. He said, well, he's pulling all the money out in cash. And he goes, why are you pulling all the money out in cash? I said, well, I explained to him that I work for a labor company, and I pull out my business card that says I work for Labor on Demand. Here's my company name, been there 5 years. I said, I cash the guys that work for us, I cash a lot of their checks because I don't want them to have to pay 10% to a check cashing company. And I said, I don't know if that's illegal. And he goes, no, that's not illegal. I said, okay. And so at this point, I'm now calling this guy like by his first name, which is like Andy, and he's calling me Gary. And the guy from Wachovia is screaming and hollering, you need to arrest this guy, it's a scam. And I'm saying, look, I haven't done anything wrong. I said, I think that they got a problem at the bank. And he's like, he closed 3 first mortgages. And I'm like, that's not true. I closed a first mortgage with Wachovia because they know it's a first mortgage. It's Wachovia. That's who I'm talking to. So I said, I closed a first loan with Wachovia. I closed a second loan with Fieldstone. And I closed a home equity line of credit with SunTrust. And because those were the 3 that they actually had found. And he's like, why didn't he close them all with just one bank? And I said, because I came to Wachovia and I explained the situation to the girl at Wachovia. I told her I needed to get like $400,000 or $500,000 out because I wanted to start flipping properties. And then the guy's like, oh, that's right, you own another property. I said, right, I'm renovating that other property because he's already done some investigation. And he said, okay. And I said, and she said, look, I can get you a loan for about $190,000, $180,000. She said, I can't get you more than that because I can't allow you to remove more than so much money from the property, but I have a friend that can get you a second mortgage. She then sent me to Fieldstone. Fieldstone, I explained the situation. She sent me to another loan officer who got me a HELOC. And I said, all of these loan officers knew what was going on. And so this guy is screaming, I said, I think they got a problem at the bank. I think the bank did something wrong. Well, the head of Wachovia is saying that's not true. We haven't broken the law. This he's running some kind of a scam. It's a shotgunning, they call it a shotgunning scam. He's running a shotgunning scam. And I said, bro, what makes more sense? A guy that works for a labor company convinced 3 major banks to lend him $500,000, or that the loan officers that work for those banks got together in order to get him over $500,000 in loans so they could make a big loan officer fee of some type. Which makes more sense? So the detective says to the guy at Wachovia, yeah, it sounds like you guys have a problem at the bank. The guy at Wachovia goes nuts. He starts screaming and hollering, and he ends up saying, look at his ID, look at his ID. His ID starts with 000. It's a fake ID. Well, in South Carolina, their IDs started with 000. And then, of course, it's like 000635042, whatever your number is. But this guy's in like California. So he doesn't know. So the detective says, no. He said, this is Gary Sullivan. I ran him through NCIC. I checked him with the South Carolina DMV. Our IDs start with 000. It's a real ID. So I look at the detective and I go, oh, come on, bro. Now I'm not Gary Sullivan. I go, what are we doing here? And he goes, I know, Gary, I know. Wachovia fraud department guy is going nuts. He's losing it. the detective says, listen, I don't even know what to charge this guy with. I haven't talked to the district attorney yet. I have to wait to talk to the district attorney. And to be honest with you, I don't even think he's broken the law. Because everything about it, he lost total credibility when he said that's a fake ID, and it's not a fake ID. So everything I'm saying looks legit. Everything this guy's saying looks like he's misunderstanding the situation. So he hangs up the phone on the guy. I stand up. I go to leave, but all I have is an ID. Well, the detective stands up and he says, look, Gary, I'm going to ask you to follow me to the police station so you can fill out a police report. And I went, okay. And he says, and he goes, is that a problem? I said, no, that's fine. And he goes, I noticed that you don't have a driver's license. All you have is an ID. Do you have a valid driver's license? And I said, yeah, I do in Nevada, whatever. And he says, and he goes, okay, and it's valid? I go, as far as I know. Well, one of the sheriff's deputies grabs the ID and says, I'll check. And he walks out to his car. I don't know what this thing's going to pull up. Well, he comes walking back in, and he says, yeah, he's got a valid driver's license. And the detective says, okay, cool, checks out. And he said, yeah, well, it says he's 5'11". Now, I'm 5'6". And he says he's 5'11". They all look at me and I go, fellas, with a good pair of shoes. And they all laugh, ha, 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 follow us, Gary. So I walk out, get in my car, follow them to the police station. You have to understand that Becky at this point has called me 40 times. I've been in the bank for at least 30 to 45 minutes. I mean, that phone call, trust me, I paraphrased it. It was a long phone call. So I'm on my way there. I pick up the phone. Becky starts screaming, oh my God, where have you been? You're number one on the Secret Service's most wanted list. And I said, I got bigger problems. So there's a cop behind me. There's a cop in front of me. I'm going to the police station. I tell her what happened. She's like, oh my God, get on the interstate. Get out. And I'm like, I can't. You don't understand. I don't have a choice. So I tell her, look, the worst that is going to happen is if I'm arrested, I'll be arrested as Gary Sullivan. They won't run my prints right away because at that time, and probably to this day, they didn't run your prints through NCI or through APHIS unless your identity was in question. My identity wasn't in question. I was Gary Sullivan. He had already checked to make sure I was Gary Sullivan. He believed I was Gary Sullivan, so they're not going to run my prints. I said, so the worst that'll happen is you get me an attorney right away, get me out on bond, and we'll take off. She goes, I'm not getting you an attorney. I'm not getting you out on bond. I'm not going to risk everything I've got for you. She goes, get on the interstate and leave. I can't do that. There's a car behind me, in front of me. Like they're escorting me into the parking lot. So I'm like, well, I guess I better not get arrested then. And I hang up the phone. I go into the police department. I fill out a police report. By this point, the guy's questionable. He's more questioning, like, doesn't quite make sense. He questions me a little bit more. I answer all the same questions. I'm fine. He asks me, I fill out the police report with him. He asked me to stand in the hallway. I stand in the hallway. I actually stand next to where all the wanted posters are. And as I'm glancing at the wanted posters, there's one color wanted poster. And it's my Secret Service's most wanted poster. So I'm like freaked out. Like I'm like, holy shit. He comes up behind me. He's like, hey, Gary. I'm like, oh my God. And he's like, listen, I talked to my lieutenant. She signed off on the police report, waiting for the district attorney to look into some stuff. Don't leave town. I said, no, I'm not going to leave town. I got 2 houses here. And he goes, okay, no problem. So he walks me out. I get in my car. I remember Becky, the phone's ringing. And I picked up the phone. I was just like, you bitch. I can't believe you were going to leave me. And she's all like, I wasn't going to leave you. I'm packing my bags. I'm coming right now. I was like, stop. So she says, what happened? I tell her what happened. I say, I'm leaving the police parking lot right now. And she goes, oh my God, get on the interstate. Go, we're going to have to pack your stuff because obviously they now know what car I was driving. The car I was driving was registered in the name Michael Eckert. which I knew they're going to figure out. Once this whole thing they figured out, they're going to track Michael Eckert back to North Carolina, to Charlotte, and that went straight to that registration went straight to my mailbox at my condo. So I don't have much time. So Becky was like, get on the interstate. And I said, I am, but I'm going to go to a couple more banks first. And she's like, no. And I hang up the phone. I go to 2 more banks. I pull out some more cash. I go to a 3rd bank. Some of the people, the cashiers, look, they see me when I walk in the bank and they basically bolt for the phone. And so I immediately turn around, get in my car and drive off. They actually ran outside and got my tag number. Like they were waiting for me. So I don't know what's happening. At this point, I jump on the interstate. I drive back to Charlotte. Becky has already relocated at this point. She'd already relocated to Houston, Texas. So I end up the next morning, pack up all my stuff in a U-Haul van, drive all the way to Houston, Texas. Get to Houston, Texas, and Becky's freaking out. She's just a complete lunatic. We get into a huge argument while I'm there. I just unpacked all my stuff out of the U-Haul van. We unpacked it into a U-Haul truck. We unpacked it into like a huge storage unit. And I had all my IDs and stuff were in the unit. So I don't have any real IDs. So, Becky's off her meds. We get into a huge argument. In the middle of the argument, I say, look, I just want to split up the money and leave. Like, I don't want to, it's over. Like, I'm done with you. Like, we weren't really dating anyway at this point because she was so insane. I was actually trying to get her to date someone else. So what happens is I get her to, we start arguing about the money, and she wants to keep all of the money. And there's like $600,000 in cash. So we start arguing back and forth, and I'm like, you're not keeping all the money. Like, I need some of this money. So we go, she wanted to give me $10,000 at one point. So we argue back and forth, and I remember telling her that I'm going to take, if you don't come up with a reasonable solution to splitting up the money, like I don't have to have half, but I need something. And I said, or I'll take all of it. And she was like, you take all of it? She said, the cops are going to be looking for you. She said, what are you going to do what are you going to do? You take 600,000, you take all the money. She said, the cops are going to find you driving down the street in that van. So basically, she was saying, like, I'm going to call the cops. And I was like, I take 600,000. I don't need that van. Now, you come up with a reasonable amount, or I'll just take all the money. And so she ends up saying $100,000. And honestly, it seems silly, but I took the $100,000 because she had an argument, which was, you can go commit fraud again and you'll have $1 million. I have to live off this money. And I was like, that's fine. So I take $100,000. I get in the van. I start driving. I drive for, a few hours. I end up stopping. I stop at like it was like a racetrack kind of thing. It wasn't racetrack. It wasn't Wawa racetrack. It was like that, So I stop at one of those places and I buy like a track phone, right? Like they have like the store, and I buy a track phone. I activate it. I call a few people from Tampa. I'm feeling lonely and homesick. I call my mom. I call some people, which I did this periodically. Whenever we would travel, we would drive somewhere and we would get a phone and call our family. So I call and I talk to my mom, and I talk to my ex-wife. I talk to a few people. And, I end up talking to this chick named Susan, who was a mortgage broker that used to work for me. And Susan says, look, I've spoken with the FBI agent here. She said if I ever talk to you, to have you call her. So I'm like, I don't really want to do it, but she convinces me. So I call, she goes, maybe you can turn yourself in. So I thought, that's true. If you turn yourself in, maybe you only get a year or two. I don't know, So, okay, I call. She answers the phone, Special Agent Calderon or whatever. And I'm like, hey, this is Matt Cox. I understand you've been looking for me. She goes, yes, we have. She goes, I go, well, what did you need? And she goes, well, Mr. Cox, we'd like you to turn yourself in. And I said, well, that's not going to happen. I'm not turning myself in. And she says, well, let's talk about this. So, we talk about it. I don't want to turn myself in, but we go back and forth, and I'm kind of negotiating, like trying to figure it out, and I convince her, like, we're going back and forth, and she's a real jerk, and so she's like, look, you turn yourself in, and we'll take it into consideration. Okay. So I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And she went, look, let's think about this. And so we start talking, and she goes, look, you're going to get caught eventually. And I was like, she said, we're going to catch you. She said, we're going to catch you. And I went, well, what's taking you so long? If you're going to catch me, why haven't you caught me? And she goes, oh, you're cocky. She says, listen, let me tell you something. She said, we're 90% sure of where you are, sweetie. Do you understand that? And I went, well, only 100% counts, sweetie. And she goes, look, eventually you're going to screw up. Eventually, you'll come back to Tampa. She said, eventually you'll get pulled over for a traffic ticket and the cop will arrest you. She goes, or she said, you'll do something. She said, somebody is going to recognize you and they're going to call and turn you in. I said, okay. I said, listen, let me explain something. I said, I've already had multiple plastic surgeries. Nobody's going to recognize me. I said, at that point I had maybe half a dozen, or no, probably by that, I've had 24 passports issued to me. At that point, I probably had a dozen. I said, I've got a dozen passports. I said, I've left the country multiple times and come back as someone else. And I said, matter of fact, I said, I've gotten tickets as someone else. I had 20 some odd driver's licenses. I got driver's licenses. I said, I even got a ticket I got so many tickets as somebody else one time. I had to go to driving school as that person because he was going to lose his license and I had 2 vehicles in his name. So I said, listen, as far as me going back to Tampa, there's nobody I want to see. I said, I'm not so stupid to be driving around in a stolen car with a broken taillight and a dead body in the trunk, okay, lady? I said, trust me, the only way we're ever going to have this conversation in person is if I turn myself in. You're never going to catch me. And so she softened a little bit and she said, look, I'll call the U.S. attorney and I'll see what I can do. So she calls the U.S. attorney, comes back. So I remember when she called the U.S. attorney, I remember saying, look, I'm gonna handle the phone. Like call me back. So she calls me back and she says 7 years. And I go, 7 years? That's insane. I'm not going to prison for 7 years. I'm not doing that. And so she's like, well, think about it. And I'm not going for 7 years. And I was like, does that include everything? Like, cause I remember thinking maybe I can wear it down. And her 7-year deal was like 7 years and you have to cooperate against everybody. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But I figured I could, even though everybody had already cooperated against me, like they had people lined up ready to talk. So I was like, let me think about this. By this point, it's been a year and a half. And so I said, I figured I could maybe get her down to 2 or 3 years or something. So we start talking back and forth. And I said, and that includes everything? And she said, listen, I need you to turn yourself in Tampa when you come. I go, well, wait a minute. I'm not turning myself in. Hold on. So we go back and forth. Eventually, I end up getting her, realizing she's dodging the question of, does it include everything? Because I said, there's other stuff you don't even know about. There's stuff that I just did that you don't know about. There's stuff that nobody's figured out yet. Like, does that include everything? And so what she ends up just keeps dodging the question. Eventually I get her on, I eventually go, well, you know what? I said, I've been asking this. You keep dodging this question. I said, does this 7-year deal include everything? And she says, eventually we're going to catch you. And I go, oh man. I said, listen, lady, does it include everything I've done? And she goes, it only includes Tampa. Well, I mean, think about it. I have a case now. Now I have a case in Atlanta. I have a case in Tampa, Atlanta, South Carolina. I mean, I've got problems. Like, if 7 years, then I'm thinking they're going to hammer me. Like, there's going to be like, I still only thought it would be 10 or 15 years. So I end up saying, listen, man, I wouldn't believe you. She goes, but look, I can call the U.S. attorney in Atlanta. And I go, you know what? I wouldn't believe you if you told me water was wet. And I threw the phone out of the window. I go back to Charlotte and to retrieve my car. I retrieve my car. And when I get my car, I get my car. Like, I remember going to the parking lot thinking that that the police, the FBI or Secret Service would be waiting for me. And if I could just get my car, I'll be okay. Well, I get in the parking garage and it's empty. It's in the middle of the day on like a fucking Wednesday or something, like it's in the middle of the day. And there's almost no cars and there's nobody there. And so I get in my car and I leave. I remember as soon as I drove out of the parking lot, I felt good. Like, I'm good. I drive directly across the street to the Starbucks, and I go to the Starbucks, which is like, it's actually catty corner. It's about 2 blocks away, right? Like, it's across the street and then wrapped around the corner from my apartment complex in downtown Charlotte. So I go inside to get a coffee because I'm going to have to leave. I gotta figure out, relocate, right? Like, I got $100,000 and no ID. So, well, I had an ID, but it's an ID that I now know. It's in the name Michael Eckert, which Becky knows. They know the cars in that name. Like, by all means, there's a be on the lookout for arrest Michael Eckert out there. So I go in, I order a cup of like a venti vanilla latte or something. I'm waiting, and I see that there's 2 people from the apartment complex waiting also for their drinks, and they're staring at me. And they're kind of talking amongst each other, and then all of a sudden the woman bolts out the back. And there was a back entrance, so that wasn't that suspicious. But the guy's just staring at me. Nonstop. It was weird. So I'm like, okay, so I'm looking at him and he's looking at me, and I was like, this is weird. So he gets his order and he just stands there holding a tray of coffees. Like, he's got like 4 coffees in like one of those styrofoam trays. He's staring at me. Then I get my coffee, I walk outside, I get my car. He walks out, he's standing next to my car. And I thought he was standing there because I thought that I hadn't paid my rent. My rent was due. It was like the 5th, and the rent's due by like the 3rd. And I thought maybe are they going to try and serve me, or are they going to get the manager? Like, what's happening? So I put my coffee up. I'm kind of arranging everything, put my seatbelt on. What I didn't know was that the woman from the apartment complex had run out the back, had run into the office at the apartment complex, and the US Marshals were questioning them about Michael Eckert and Gary Sullivan, and they had already said it's the same person. So she runs in and says, oh my God, he's right across the street. So they come bolting out the door, running towards me. I look out to see to make sure that it's all clear. It is. But I don't realize what's going on. So all of a sudden, the guy holding the tray starts screaming, he's right there, he's right here. He drops the tray of coffee. I look in the rearview mirror, and there's 2 guys running towards the back of my car. So I immediately hit the gas, turn the wheel, whip out onto the road, and take off. And I ended up leaving them in the street. So they're like 50 feet, maybe 100 or maybe 50 feet behind me when they finally stop and they pick up their phones. I could see them yelling in their cell phones. I went right down the street, about a mile or so down the street, to a homeless facility, pulled into the parking lot and started surveying homeless guys. Got 3 guys. I ended up with getting 3 different IDs or identities. I ended up getting a guy by the name of Joseph Marion Carter Jr. I immediately drive straight to Nashville, Tennessee. I get to Nashville. And when I get to Nashville, I immediately go and I get a cell phone, of course. I then turn around and I get a business card. So I got a cell phone, a business card. I'm driving around a car that the cops are looking for. And I'm driving around looking for an apartment. As soon as I see this older guy, probably in his 60s or 70s, putting a for rent sign in the front yard of what looks like what's actually a couple of townhouses. I pull in, I get out, and I said, listen, this is the second day I was there. So I pull in and I say, hey, listen, I said, is this for rent? And they were like, yes, sir. So we walk into it, we come back down, I said, it's great. I said, what do you need? You need my driver's, you need to pull my credit, and he looked at me and he goes, you know what? You look like a nice young man. I'll take first month and last month. We can sign the lease right now. Because he looked at me, looked at my car, and I remember thinking, I'm going to like Nashville. Like, they're very trusting here. So I end up signing the lease, giving him cash. He gives me the keys. The next day I get the electric and water turned on. I get cable, I get, Wi-Fi, I get all my stuff turned on. Well, cable, anyway, internet at the time. So I get everything turned on. I immediately order all of the documents from this guy for all three of those guys, but the main guy was Joseph Carter, so I went by Carter. So I get Carter's information within a week. I've got Carter's information, and I've got a brand new driver's license. I get a driver's license in his name. Then I get the other guys in, Walter Holcomb, I forget the other guy's name, was Phillips or something. I get IDs in their name, driver's licenses in their names. I then drive my car all the way back to Nashville. I leave it in I drive my car. I had like an Audi Infinity. It's an Audi Infinity. I had an Infinity like G35 or something. It was brand new. Those were brand new. I think they're way higher now, but it was a brand new car. So I drive it all the way back. I leave it in long-term parking in Charlotte, North Carolina. I get on a plane. I fly back to Nashville. I get myself a new car. I then turn around. I go out and I buy a bunch of rental properties, real cheap, $50,000, $30,000, $60,000. I then record the values of those properties much higher, $200,000, $210,000, $190,000. Refinance those properties, pull out a fucking bunch of cash. Start dating this chick named Amanda. I then take that money and I buy even more property. I refinance those. I've got like 20 some odd properties, bunch of vacant lots. Amanda moves in with me. We start building new houses. Amanda finds out that I'm wanted. So she knows I'm wanted. Not a great situation, but it's fine. She's happy. Her parents think I'm in the Secret Service. Her parents think that I think her mom thought I was married, and her dad thought I was in the witness protection program. That's hilarious, right? I always forget this part. Because she constantly, she's like, look, he talks about his parents, he talks about his siblings, he has friends in Tampa, he owned a mortgage company in Tampa, but he never goes to Tampa, and he has nothing, everything in his house is brand new. Like, everything's new. Your clothes, she's like, you don't own a pair of underwear that's more than a few months old. Like, you have no photographs of anybody. And so, it was odd to her. Eventually, I won't get into it, but she figures out by going through my computer who I am. I now know she knows who I am. I'm freaked out. She convinces me she will never tell anybody. I should have left. Like, I always knew I should have left. When that happened, I should have left. I knew it. That was a huge mistake. I mean, not that it's not all a mistake, but it was a mistake. Well, what ends up happening is, like, listen, there's so many other things. Like, I get caught here. I mean, keep in mind, I'm getting traffic tickets. Amanda and I, we end up, like, we're renovating properties. We end up with this, like, I could go on and on. Like, we drive the value of this area in Nashville, J.C. Napier area. Like, we drive it through the roof. It's at, like, these houses are going for like $240,000, $250,000 in an area where houses are just shitholes. We're doing renovations, we're building new properties, we're buying properties, we're bulldozing houses. We've got a massive warehouse, construction equipment, general contractors that work for us. Like, we're doing great. It's like $3.5 million I think I end up borrowing on houses and start renovating. I start a development company. We're doing really well. And one night, we end up sleeping with this chick. We end up start dating this other chick. Her name was Trina. So we start seeing Trina. So we're dating Trina. I'm not dating her. She's coming over a couple nights a week. So whatever. Trina's coming over. Amanda and I are traveling. She would take care of Amanda's son. His name was Cameron. We would go to where did we go? I mean, we went to Greece. We went to Italy. We went to Greece, went to Italy, we went to Croatia, and we would travel, So one night we're at home, and we have a home invasion. So these guys, a couple of black guys kick in the front door. They have masks on and gloves, and I don't even know if they had gloves, but they come in, they got guns. They put us on the ground, they throw a blanket over us, and they rob us. And I'm ready to give them everything, right? Like, I'm like, give them this, give them that. They had missed like, I don't know, what was it, like $100,000 in cash or something. But we give them watches, all kinds of stuff. They grab our car, like one of the cars, and they take off. And then that's it. I think it was probably one of the contractors that worked with us. Some of the guys, obviously these guys are scummy guys. Some not the contractor, but some of the guys that worked for him were kind of scummy, and they saw that we had money. They'd come to our house and they saw how much money we had, and they thought we were an easy mark. So they probably put some guys up to it. Never found out who it was. But then we got the whole thing on video. So what happens is we've lost our cell phones, everything. We end up going, we call the cops, they come. The cop's like, look, you got to get out of this neighborhood. Like, this is a rough neighborhood. You can't have, your wife and her son in this neighborhood, and you've got plenty of money. I was like, yeah, you're right. So we end up checking into a hotel like the Hyatt or something. It takes us a day or two to get the next day or so, we get our phones back. So we get our phones back, and now we're looking for new houses. Like, spend the whole day looking for new houses. Like, we want to get out of this neighborhood. We're staying in the hotel until we're at, and we're staying at a hotel until we get a new place. Like, I'm not going to put them back in that house. Well, what happens is Trina calls when we got our phones back, and she's like, what's going on? Well, what had happened was Amanda had confided in Trina who I was. Trina had called the Secret Service and turned me in. The Secret Service, the day after the home invasion, the Secret Service start staking out our house. Well, 3 days have gone by. We're not there. She's like, where are you guys? And I tell her about the home invasion. I tell her that we're staying at the Hyatt. They immediately rush to the Hyatt. But my driver's license had been stolen with my wallet, and I had checked into the Hyatt under the name Walter Holcomb, which was another identity. So when they go to the Hyatt, they're looking for Joseph Carter, but we're registered as Walter Holcomb, so they're like, he's gone. So the next day, or he's not here, he must have split town. Next day, Trina calls me in the morning, and she's like, hey, where are you? And I go, I'm at the office. And she goes, is Amanda there? And I was like, no. And she goes, okay. She goes, all right. And she hands up the phone. Well, then I get a phone call from the local police department, and they say, look, we would like the surveillance footage from your robbery. Can you meet us at your house? I said, sure. So I get in my car and I'm driving back to the house. And as I'm pulling in, Amanda calls. And Amanda's like, hey, I just got a panicked phone call from Trina. She's freaking out. I think something's wrong. I think she might have done something stupid. And I'm like what? Like, she doesn't know who I am, so what could she have done? And she's, oh my God, I fucked up. I think I fucked up. And I'm like, well, what did you do? So I get out of the car and I'm walking. And as I'm walking out, the black SUVs pull up, and they pull up and they jump out and they pull their guns and go, get on the ground. And I can see it says Secret Service across their chest. And, I drop the phone and I get on the ground. They handcuff me and they pick me up. And now I've been arrested. So Amanda, who I remember was always talking about, like, if you're ever caught, I'll wait for you. I'm going to be there for you. I love you. Never met anybody like you. I would wait. I'll never tell them anything. That was the whole argument, like, when she found out who I was. She immediately drove to the bank, went to the safety deposit box, emptied it out of cash, got like 6 passports and a bunch of fake driver's licenses that I had, and went straight to the Secret Service's office and gave it to them and said, I just went to my safety deposit box and I just found this, didn't even know it was there. Didn't give them the cash. Pulled the cash out of the freezer from the house, and then packed all of her bags and left. I think I got one letter from her. I end up going to, I get arrested. The Secret Service shows up. They try and talk to me. I don't talk to them right then. I say, look, I want to talk to a lawyer. And, I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to wrap this up. But I end up getting a sentence to 26 years in federal prison. My mortgage company was estimated to have done around $40 million in fraud. I personally had done $11.5 million in Tampa, another $500,000 or so in Atlanta, another $1 million and something in South Carolina, in Tennessee, did $3.5 million. I end up getting, it's like 15 million or so roughly. I end up getting charged with about 15 million in fraud personally. I get charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, bank fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, mail fraud, aggravated identity theft. I get charged with passport fraud, social security fraud, social security identification fraud, government document fraud. There's a bunch of other little ones in there I can never remember. And I got some of them. They dropped some of them. I think they dropped the money laundering. So yeah. So anyway, it's. I ended up getting 26 years. Ultimately, I ended up getting my sentence cut several times, and definitely not worth it. By the way, I always get asked that question: was it worth it? Definitely not worth it. It always bothers me when these guys, people get interviewed, these fraud guys or whatever, just criminals in general, and they always say, "Well, would I do it again?" Yeah, because it made me the person I am today. But the truth is, the person I am today is a 50-some-odd-year-old man who's struggling. I don't have a relationship with my son. Barely talk to my family. And, in general, putting your life back together at the age of, I guess at this point I'm 54, is rough. Not that anybody should feel bad for me, because I absolutely brought this all on myself. I mean, there's no doubt that I had, that I definitely did this to myself. But I have a lifetime of regrets. A lifetime. And anybody who says, "Oh, well, going to prison for 15 years or 20 years or 30 years, yeah, well, that made me the person I am today," and that's just delusional. Like, I just ruined my life. And every bad decision I've ever made was as a result of arrogance. It was all ego-based. Like, I didn't want to admit that I was wrong. I didn't want to step back. I didn't want anybody to think that I was a dirtbag or a scumbag. And the truth is, I'm a scumbag. The truth is, I'm a scumbag. And that's just the way it is.